Welcome to the Vergecast, the flagship podcast of configuration changes. I'm your friend David Pierce, and I am in my basement, as always, doing a shipping day. So I'm going on vacation at the end of this week. I'm going to spend 2 weeks in the outdoors, just like staring at trees and not screens. It's going to be amazing. Can't wait. But what I always try to do before I go on vacation is just like kind of get stuff together. There's nothing worse than coming home to like mess. So trying to get everything cleaned off. And mostly what that means in my particular line of work is just shipping things. One of the great things about this job is you accumulate a lot of gadgets. And one of the annoying things about this job is you have to ship them all back. So right now I have a bunch of tablets on my desk. I have a case for a thing. I don't even know what the thing is. I have a bunch of watch boxes that have to go back. I see 5 phones that I have to do something with. I have some AR glasses. I have these Amazon Echo frames. I have a camera and I have a Vision Pro. And I have, that's another phone. So that's 6 phones. I have the Humane AI pin that I keep meaning to send back. I have 2 rabbits. They sent me 2 for some reason. I don't know why. I don't want either one of them. So basically what is going to happen here is I have a very carefully organized thing of packing tape in the utility room over there. And I'm going to spend all day shoving things into boxes, and then I'm going to load my car. And as I do 4 or 5 times a year, I'm going to dump thousands of things into the UPS office all at once. And then it's going to feel like a gigantic weight is lifted off my shoulders. I both hate this and kind of love how it feels at the very end. Anyway, lots to do on the Vergecast today. We are going to talk about the crazy thing that happened on Friday when, thanks to something happening with CrowdStrike and Windows, computers all over the world just went down and broke, and it felt like everything from airlines to banks just fell apart all at once. We're going to talk about what happened, what it means that can happen, and where we go from here. We're also going to talk about one of my all-time favorite apps called Zombies Run, and we're going to talk about what that app means for fitness and what it gets right about how we think about quantifying ourselves and tracking things and gamification and everything that feels toxic and wrong with the way that our devices work now, why that app feels like none of it. We had a super fun time talking to one of the creators. It's a really good interview. We also have a fun hotline question about handheld gaming, which we've been talking a lot about on this show recently, so lots to get to. All that is coming up in just a second, but I just this second realized that I don't have anywhere near enough actual boxes, which means I have to go, I think, to like Home Depot and pay a bunch of money for a bunch of boxes to then pay a bunch of money to ship to someone else. It's a process. Anyway, this is the Vergecast. We'll be right back. All right, so obviously, I should have mentioned this up top. The biggest news happening right now, at least in the United States, is President Joe Biden dropping out of the race for 2024, endorsing his vice president, Kamala Harris. It's just pure chaos in the American election season right now, and we're going to spend a lot of time over the next few months covering this. But right now, just didn't feel like the right moment. So we're going to come back to this. We'll probably talk a bunch about it on Friday's show. We're going to talk a lot about politics and policy and all of this for the next several months. Keep an eye on theverge.com. For right now, I want to talk about something that happened on Friday, which is that a lot of the world woke up to computers that didn't work. Banks were having trouble. Airlines were having trouble. It felt like all at once, the whole world just kind of crashed. And it turns out this was something that happened because of a company called CrowdStrike on Windows computers. And it has made a lot of people feel a lot of feelings about what it means that we are so reliant on technology, and not just technology, but very specific things from very specific companies. And all of it feels so important and infrastructural, but it all also feels fragile. So I want to talk about what has happened over the last few days, what we've learned, and where we might go forward in how we think about computers and how we use them for the most important things going on in the world. Tom Warren on our team has been covering all of this all weekend. I think didn't have a weekend by the sounds of things. So we're going to get into it. Hi, Tom.
Hey, good to be back.
So you have like an IT-ish background a little bit. Is this like the confluence of all of your interests these last few days?
Yeah, this is like, I'm so glad I got out of IT more than a decade ago kind of incident. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it seems right. So let's rewind back to Friday morning. You're in the UK. I'm in the US. So you woke up a few hours earlier than I did and got online. Like, Describe to me the scenes of Friday morning as you were getting up and getting online.
Chaos. No, so I woke up late around about 7 a.m. and I had like a couple of people, one that I used to work with and just a good friend who's like very technical, messaged me saying, have you seen this in Australia? Like what's going on out there? And I was like, oh, what's all this? And I looked at like the Reddit thread. There was like loads of sysadmins complaining. And usually that's a good sign of any sort of major sort of Windows outages or anything related to that is Reddit people getting angry, essentially, is a good flag. Right. Yeah, so I saw that. And then there's some like media reports out of Australia about banks being affected, supermarkets, airlines, all the usual, the stuff that we've seen. But then it started to spread, right? So I turned on like the TV, 7:15 to watch like Sky News and they weren't running the news. And I was like, this is weird. Huh. And then it came like one of their tech persons had tweeted saying they were offline because of some tech issues. And then it started to like escalate. It was like some of the airports warning of the initial flights that start around about that time of the day, like 7 a.m. is kind of like the early flights of delays and stuff. And I was like, okay, right, I've got to figure out what's going on here. And then obviously we saw the CrowdStrike thing and then it all kind of just started spiraling. Like you just saw more and more. But at the same time, there was a Microsoft Azure cloud outage going on.
Oh God,
like,
I didn't even know that.
It wasn't a huge one. Yeah, it wasn't a huge one, but it was kind of small. So it started out with like everyone blaming Microsoft basically for this outage to start off with.
Yeah, how quickly by the time I was online, CrowdStrike was kind of already in the conversation. There was a lot of like, right when I became aware of the story, it was kind of at that moment where it was like, okay, this is a CrowdStrike thing. We hadn't quite gotten to here's what's going on yet. But how did folks figure out that CrowdStrike was the issue here?
Yeah, I think mainly because on Reddit, the people that were posting there, the sysadmins, were posting the stuff from CrowdStrike's support, which you obviously had to be a CrowdStrike customer to access. It wasn't available publicly. So then it was like, okay, this is what's actually caused it. It's obviously not a Windows problem because not everyone's waking up with this. It's like a select amount of machines, but enough to obviously be causing a problem. And they issued this update. I think it was like around about like 5 a.m. UK time. And then I think it was like an hour and 20 minutes or so, near enough, when they pulled it. But that was that time when it was like middle of the afternoon or something in Australia, like the peak time for people to all have their machines on with CrowdStrike installed. And they obviously have quite a big install base there, I guess, in Australia. So they got hit the hardest, like initially.
I think about that with like, you see the companies that do maintenance or software updates or whatever, and they always do them. It's almost always overnight in the US, right? So the thing you're describing, like 5 a.m. UK time, that's middle of the night in the US.
Yeah.
It had never occurred to me before this, but that's got to suck if you live in one of these timelines that is like opposite the US and all of these things are happening in the middle of your workday all the time, over and over again. So like Australia just getting screwed by software updates left and right here. I never really thought about that before. I'm sorry, Australia.
I think they got hit the hardest because I think just all the machines were online, right, to get this update. So and then obviously the European machines, a lot of these machines will be just, people leave the office, they don't turn them off, for example. These are also critical systems that this is usually installed on, so they're pretty much always online. So that's why there was like 8.5 million machines in total affected. We saw I feel like there was less in the US affected in terms of like the stuff that we saw in Australia, like the supermarkets and people not being able to get groceries and, all those like affecting hospital appointments and stuff. I think there was a little bit less of that in the US.
The biggest thing that happened in the US, at least anecdotally, was the airline
right?
stuff. Yeah.
And
then there was
the
graphs that you could see of the planes in the sky was pretty incredible for a few hours.
Which usually only happens like they ground that many flights, usually when there's like something terrible happens, right? But that's still ongoing. I think Delta actually said yesterday they're still cancelling flights and cancelling some today. So I think they've been particularly like worse hit than the other major sort of airlines in the US. But so there's still a bit of a fallout going on there.
Yeah. So with a few days of hindsight, it seems like we have a pretty clear sense of what happened. So just back all the way up, like what happened here? What broke? And I guess start with who is CrowdStrike, because I think most people reasonably do not and should not have to know who CrowdStrike is. So like start all the way at the beginning. What went wrong here?
Yeah, they're probably the only time you've ever heard of CrowdStrike is that they sponsor Mercedes in the F1.
Yeah, that's
like
right.
if you watch Formula One, then maybe.
Wait, I knew I had heard that name before. That's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
funny. Okay, that
That's
is right.
where.
Yeah, there you go.
And there was that picture of the Windows machines that had crashed at the Mercedes F1 garage
Yep.
when they were doing the testing, and they had CrowdStrike on their t-shirts. It's just perfect. But yeah, on Friday morning, CrowdStrike issued what they call like a content update to their protection system. And CrowdStrike is a third-party security firm that just think of it basically as antivirus. Essentially, it's a lot more sophisticated than that because obviously cybersecurity these days has advanced further. But it's a cloud-based solution that pushes updates to machines that pay for this software. And I think it's around about $50 a machine, so it's not cheap. Like to protect your system with this stuff. So it's usually on critical systems. So that's why you saw such an impact. But yeah.
And do you mean critical systems in the sense of like super secure government computers, or just like computers that can't afford to go down? Or I guess both.
Yeah, more computers that can't really afford to go down.
Okay.
Like you see it in all the airport screens were all Windows machines, and they're kind of critical for communications to passengers and stuff. So it's not critical in the security side potentially, but more the infrastructure side.
Got it. Okay.
Of things. Yeah. So yeah, they issued a regular update. I think it was about 5 a.m. UK time, around about then, which is about midnight Eastern, and then all the machines started collecting that update because that is the way that this system is designed, so that you get these updates, so you're protected against any emerging threats, right? Like you'll get.
Right. And it's not like a button you have to click on the computer to update. Like this is one thing I think I've heard some folks having trouble understanding. Like this is not an update that appears and you click a thing and your computer reboots.
No.
This is like, and it's designed to happen in the background all the time, right?
Yeah,
Like this is
yeah.
the kind of update CrowdStrike does constantly, if I understand.
Yeah, it does these like, if not hourly, like daily.
Okay.
You know, like these are pretty frequent updates. So the way that the system works, let's explain that first, is that it runs at the very highest level of Windows. So basically in the kernel, which is like a privileged area of Windows that most apps don't touch or go near. It's like your anti-cheat systems for PC games. They'll see this sort of security scanning software is allowed in there, and Microsoft allows that. And so they have a driver that runs at the boot of Windows to protect the system. And then they have these content delivery updates that are sort of like the rules and regulations around how this driver functions and how it detects stuff. And it's that sort of update, not the driver, that caused the issues. And there was basically a corruption in the update. And then the driver's obviously gone, oh no, what's happening? Crashed. And then Windows has gone, oh no, what's happening? Blue screen. And then reboot. And then it's keeps doing that every time because it keeps reading that latest content update. And so they've managed to fix it on some machines because you can keep rebooting the machine. And if you're lucky, the network stack will initialize in Windows before CrowdStrike does. And then you get the update, or CrowdStrike starts its like scanning. So you get the update, the latest like dictionary definitions essentially before it crashes. So some have been able to recover from that. I'm not sure what the percentage is because CrowdStrike haven't really sort of detailed that. And they're also working on some sort of other remediation, some mysterious remediation that they've been testing apparently over the last 24 hours. So maybe get some more details about that. But that's essentially what happened. It was like 78 minutes of push this faulty update out to machines. And obviously there's a bunch of them that are virtual machines, there's servers, there's just machines that are always on, like we were talking about the airport and stuff. So they all just sort of grabbed it. If you obviously had a machine that you turned on once they pulled the bad update, you wouldn't have been affected, but it still hit 8.5 million devices, which sounds like a lot as well, and it is. But Microsoft's point is like it's less than 1% of Windows machines, but it's the important part of Windows machines.
Let's talk through that.
Yeah,
that's the thing, right? I think it's like the percentage of Microsoft computers that have CrowdStrike is by definition going to be a very important percentage of Microsoft PCs, right? And those matter a lot that they keep running. So this idea that like, you know, the Surface laptop my wife has in her office upstairs didn't crash. It's like, right. I don't know if that's the victory for Microsoft that we're hoping for.
No.
But it is useful perspective. It didn't.
Yeah.
And I think Microsoft is trying desperately to say, like, this isn't Windows. Like, this is not a Windows problem. We didn't do it.
Yeah, definitely. But can you imagine if it had been 10%? Like,
I know.
It could have been like even like a lot worse.
Yeah.
It was obviously very bad, but I'm just yeah, it could have been really bad. So, and it just kind of shows you like the reliance on this stuff. So
You've been tracking kind of the different versions of the fix that have been going on here. Because I think,
yes,
walk me through kind of where we've been. Because at the very beginning, if I remember right, one of the big problems was the fix was super manual. You had to like go
yes,
into every airport kiosk computer, reboot it in safe mode, do a thing, do another thing, and then it would work again. And it's like, fine for your computer at home, but that doesn't work for every airline and airport and bank around the world. Like that's just not a good.
yeah.
So, but it seems like even just a few days later, there's a much better track for getting this stuff fixed. So walk me through that a little bit.
Yeah, kind of yes and no, because obviously we talked about the reboot thing is what CrowdStrike's been recommended, and that's working on some.
What were you saying? Up to 15 times you wrote, right? Just basically keep turning it off and on again.
Apparently,
Until
just keep rebooting, and that's working for some people. It's not working for everyone, so there's still a lot of manual intervention going on. So you still have the option of doing it manually, where you'd have to start the machine in safe mode, which requires physical access and a keyboard to get this machine to go in safe mode, and then you need admin rights to actually delete the faulty file. So there's quite a lot of a lot of intervention there. It's not like just send an update, click a button and an update is there. The other option is Microsoft's created a recovery tool, which can sort of automate that process. But the only problem is a lot of these machines, because they're critical and they're out sort of in airports and stuff, they might be locked down by BitLocker, which is disk encryption. So then that tool can't do that without you having a recovery key, which are unique for every machine. And then you have to type it's long. It's like a Windows key, product key that you put in, that sort of length, to then allow you access. So there's still a lot of manual intervention going on. We've seen videos and pictures of like people scaling ladders in airports and stuff just to literally plug USBs into like these machines. It's just like, yeah. There's a lot that's still going on. So I'd love to know what the percentage of ones that were fixed by rebooting multiple times versus manual intervention, and also just do IT admins just go and just blast this thing away and make sure that machine's fixed, moved on to the next. Like it's a choice, isn't it, for every business as well? Do you want to sit there trying to reboot it, or do you just want to fix it in the amount of time that you could have sat there rebooting it sort of 20 times? So I think it's a choice. But yeah, there's some more tools, and then like we said, CrowdStrike's potentially doing something. I can't remember the exact wording they've put on it, but it's like some cloud-based solution that they think they might have got this fixed somehow. But I'm not sure how that's going to work.
You cover Microsoft for us.
Yes.
I feel like over the last 72 hours, this has gone from being a Microsoft disaster to not really being a Microsoft disaster. It's kind of a Microsoft adjacent disaster, I would say.
Yeah.
But what is your sense of what, A, kind of how this looks for Microsoft, and B, like if you're Microsoft and you're a company that obviously is responsible in some ways for these kinds of crucial machines and the way that these systems work, is your sense that anything changes here? Is this just like a bad thing that happened and we all recover and move on, or does this feel like it might change things?
Yeah, I feel like it might change things. I think there's a lot going on here. It's obviously CrowdStrike, which is a third-party vendor. They get privileged access to be able to run this software in the way they do.
Right, which is not normal, we should say. Like it's a big thing to give somebody essentially that kind of access.
Yeah.
It's like being inside of your computer in a very real way.
Yeah, and Microsoft allows it. And I think that there was a statement where Microsoft said that essentially that they have to give this access because of a ruling by the European Commission in 2009, which I think is like, yes, true, but also they could possibly do what Apple have done and create an architecture where they have their own API set and then vendors plug into that. But yeah, I don't know. I need to look into that more fully to see the legalities on that. But yes, they do have to keep their kernel open. And it's not necessarily that they have to keep the kernel open. It's just that they can't privilege their own security software over other vendors, seen as anti-competitive. And they've tried to lock down Windows a bunch over the years to sort of secure things up. And they always do get accused of being, anti-competitive, whether it's like through really dumb ways like S mode, or, some more ways like TPM chips on Windows 11. Like there's always going to be a pushback, because people see Windows as this open system, and they do not like it when Microsoft tries to lock it down for whatever reasons they might be doing it. But I feel like this might trigger some sort of change. The only thing is that the Mac like way of doing it hasn't been perfect. It actually, sometimes the security software that runs there does cause panic errors on Mac OS. So there's no like perfect way of doing this. And I think Microsoft's kind of stuck in this weird situation where it's like they kind of should take some of the blame here, because should we say, if there's a driver that's faulty and that's stopping Windows from booting or crashing it at boot, why does Windows not unload that after it's done that like 5 times or whatever? However long you want to say, but it should be intelligent enough to be like, something weird's going on here. Because as a human, if something was crashing, you just stop it, wouldn't you? And be like, let's see what's going on here. Right. But it just allows that behavior to happen. So I feel like they need to address some of that to stop this sort of thing happening in the future as well. But again, it's not their update, so that it wasn't their fault. But they can help, if you know what I mean. So yeah, but I think it's going to trigger a lot of conversations around this. And it's just interesting because CrowdStrike obviously competes with Microsoft. And Microsoft has its own endpoint stuff like Intune that it sells to customers and competes with CrowdStrike for one of the sales teams. The CEO of CrowdStrike regularly goes on TV broadcasts and interviews and bashes Microsoft's security record, which obviously has not been great over the past few years. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. And I think there was something about how there was an incident that happened, I think it was in 2010, when McAfee sent out an update similar to this, and it crashed a bunch of Windows XP machines. And the CrowdStrike CEO was the CTO at McAfee at the time. So it's like, yeah, there's a lot of history between security vendors and Microsoft and all this stuff where they want it to be open. Microsoft's like, yeah, but you should trust us. And then everyone's like, well, look what's happened. We've trusted you for the past couple of decades, so I think there's going to be a lot of conversations around that.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting microcosm of both sides of the debate here, right? Because like if you want to argue for the closed ecosystem, it's so that things like this don't happen. And if you want to argue for the open ecosystem, it's that mostly things like this don't happen, right? Like part of what's so interesting about this to me is it is on the one hand sort of remarkable that like the McAfee thing was in 2010 and this is this year. And these things don't actually happen all that often. And yet when they do, they literally like set the world on fire, right? Like
it's catastrophic.
Right. And we're so reliant on this stuff now. And I think it comes to a point where, and like you said, nobody is perfect. I don't think there is a version of this that is perfect. And it just makes you wonder like, okay, how do we even think about our reliance on this stuff as people, as businesses, as like society? Like the fact that what amounts to like a security update to your computer could prevent you from flying to your vacation is just like a weird thing nobody thinks about. And I have spent now a lot of time thinking about it, and I still don't know how to sort through it, because it's not like get rid of all the computers, pen and paper will fix it. Is like, that's clearly not the answer. But
yeah, I've seen some people tweet like maybe people should use endpoints in like point of sales devices in supermarkets should be iPads. It's like, yeah, but that's expensive for supermarkets. They can't afford that.
Well, and I don't know that iPads are like famously perfect technology.
Yeah, like there's so many different solutions, but I think really what it should highlight is that these companies like CrowdStrike and Microsoft need to definitely work a lot closer together. Rather than being this competitive force against each other, because it's no good going on TV and bashing your competitors and stuff, and they both do it. So it's like that. I think in cybersecurity in general at the moment, there needs to just definitely be a larger focus on the joint customers. Who knows whether that happened, but yeah, the fact that this sort of stuff can take down so much stuff, and it was only less than 1% of Windows machines, that should be a major red flag. Like if this was 10% upwards, it'd be, who knows? Like if it was a Windows update that had done this as well. Like, yeah.
I was just going to say, like you talk about nobody's security record is perfect. Like if this is something Microsoft had pushed, and there's not necessarily a good reason it couldn't have been Microsoft that pushed it, the scale would have been dramatically different. Like part of what I think, and you've probably seen more of this than I have, but to me at least, it seems like the question of what went wrong at CrowdStrike that allowed this to happen is going to be the big question.
Why wasn't it tested, right? Like that.
Right. Or
Yeah.
like, was this the kind of thing that they do a million times a day and so somebody got sloppy? Was this a failure of process? Did it follow the process? And, sometimes bad things happen. Like that to me feels like the kind of core piece of this that we still haven't really seen is like what or who screwed up that this could happen. And is it a thing we can fix, or is this just like a thing that's going to happen every once in a while and we have to figure out how to live with it?
Yeah, I think what it created was like basically a sort of memory panic. So it was like this file calls the driver to be like try to write to a part of memory that it shouldn't be, and then Windows is obviously like, no, you can't do that. Let's kill this driver, or the driver crashed and killed Windows with it. I think when it comes to like, there's going to be obviously a lot of pointing fingers and who takes the blame for it. But I think there's definitely Windows should do a better job at this. But there's also CrowdStrike should do a better job at testing its update. Like, how has that gone out to 8.5 million devices and not being spotted? Like, why don't they automate that testing or something like that? There's going to be questions about how that actually happened. But yeah, I think Microsoft takes probably like, I don't know, 10 to 20% of the blame here or something. And I just hope that they both look at it and come up with a solution that stops this from ever happening again. Because I don't think the solution is rip these guys out of the kernel, because Microsoft doesn't do a ton of innovative stuff with Windows at the moment. So allowing people to have kernel access allows for some of that innovation. And some like CrowdStrike pushes that security innovation where Microsoft might not. Take it like Internet Explorer back in the day. If we just let Microsoft define the web, we wouldn't have had Chrome, we wouldn't have had all that competition. So it's like, I don't want to see it swing one way or the other. I just want to see cooperation, really. This never happens again.
Well, and especially in these moments where these things are not allowed to fail, right? I think part of what was so eye-opening, I think, about this whole thing was just realizing how much of the world runs on Windows computers. And not even different Windows computers, just Windows computers that the signs you see at the mall are just Windows computers. And I think
you go to an ATM and take out cash, it's probably Windows. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think to me, this question of, okay, we have these operating systems, we have this software. Do we need to think really differently about the ones that are like modern infrastructure in a way that isn't just functionally a Windows computer? Like, I don't know. It's just the fact that it's basically just a bunch of like crappy little PC boxes that keep our banks running is one of those things I think a lot of people sort of intellectually know, but it's actually probably not how it should work. And I don't know, this is where I get in like way over my head on how all the technology of this actually works, but it does feel like we are at a point where there is a set of computers in the world that just cannot fail.
Yeah.
And that maybe having them be just computers is not the right way to think about it.
Yeah. I don't know what the alternative is, but
that's the thing. I don't either.
That's the thing, is that they're just cheap, right? It's cheaper for them to, what is the alternative really? Like, they're not going to go Mac OS. They could do Linux, but then that could be complicated. Like,
that has its own mess.
Yeah. So it's like, I don't know. I think that's the biggest problem, is that there is actually a monopoly here, right? At play with Windows, and it always has been. And it's like there isn't really a good alternative. And the alternatives to secure these things are now causing issues. So it's like, yeah, like where do you stop at this? But I mean, maybe the alternative is Microsoft creates a lockdown version of Windows for these sort of devices. I think they've done similar sort of stuff in the past, but the problem there is that then you get complicated apps that want to do stuff on these, and then you have the same things. Like, okay, well, we just need to give them Windows. So, and
you get to the point where there's only 2 people on Earth and 1 vendor that know how to service these things, and that causes its own problems. And it's a tough thing, but it feels like I wonder if this moment ends up being a kind of a blip on the radar, or if people start to talk seriously about like, okay, how do we make these things work the way that we need them to going forward? And I have no idea what that'll look like, but I think it'll be fascinating to watch.
And the fragility of this situation just reminds me of like when I used to be an IT admin, we literally had like a ticker that would go around in Canary Wharf, and it was powered by a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet, and I'd input data into it myself and maintain it. And if I put in something wrong, it would crash the whole ticker and it'd be like flashing and going crazy. Like, that's just, that's just like the perfect example of how you see this stuff out in the world, like the screens at airports, and you just don't realize that usually it's some crappy software and just the most basic stuff powering that thing.
Yeah.
Probably from like 10, 20 years ago.
I keep thinking about, for whatever reason, I think it was when Oppenheimer was out, and there was that picture somebody posted of the IMAX theater with a Palm Pilot powering it. And we went and found somebody who ran the theater, and they were like, look, it works. Nobody touches it. It's been there for years. Like, no one understands it. It's just this weird little thing that keeps the plate spinning. So we keep it running. And I feel like more of the world works like that than any of us would like it to.
Oh yeah. It's all like held together by string, and that string started going apart on Friday.
Yeah, exactly. So it seems like most of the worst of this is, if not over, then kind of on the way to recovery.
Yeah, I think so. I think because if you're an ITM in a business, you're going to prioritize the people and systems that matter the most first of all, and get those back up and running. And
yeah, there are a lot of people who worked all weekend, I suspect. Yes. So to all of you IT folks listening, we love you.
Yeah, that's a tough one, especially on Friday when you think, nice chill Friday, looking forward to the weekend.
What fallout is left here? What are you keeping an eye on this week?
I'm definitely keeping an eye on the Delta situation because they seem to be the most impacted by this in terms of airlines, hospitals, because we've seen people like not being able to get their appointments and stuff to see, because in schools, I guess, as well, although certainly in Europe and the UK, like a lot of kids are out of school now for the summer holidays. So we'll see. It's where there's typically less investment in infrastructure where it kind of matters, like schools and hospitals and stuff, where they just don't have the budget. So it'd be interesting to see where those go and whether there's still some sort of lingering issues today and tomorrow. But I feel like we'll hear less about this as the week goes on, for sure. It's definitely... yeah, it's getting better out there.
In some sense, like, thank God it happened on a Friday and not on like a Tuesday morning, and we would have felt the full effects of this for like a couple of days in the middle of the week. Yeah.
We'll see. Yeah.
Yeah. That's good.
It's on its way to being fixed now anyway.
That's good. Well, yeah, here's, as always, computers are terrifying, fragile things.
The funniest thing about it though was like one of Microsoft's fixes was like literally have you turned it off and on 15 times.
Unreal.
It's the meme coming true.
It really, like, it is astounding how much of the world is just unplug it and plug it back in again. And it goes back to the same thing, right? Like these things are fragile and simple in so many ways that we would, like, maybe it's scary that they're that fragile and that simple, but that is where we are.
It definitely is.
Yeah. All right, Tom, thank you as always.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
All right, we got to take a break, and then we're going to come back and talk about fitness, but like in a fun way. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. So Victoria Song at The Verge, we all call her V, has been on the show a few times recently talking about wearables and rest days on the Apple Watch. And one of the things that I've discovered in talking to her over the last couple of months is that she and I have really similar ideas about fitness and the quantified self and the idea of tracking yourself, which mostly is to say we have very conflicted relationships with these things. The idea of having these streaks and leaderboards and you should always be aspiring to be an elite athlete, it's just a lot. And another thing that V and I have in common is that our journey as runners, hers much more successful than mine, started in the same place with an app called Zombies Run. So what she and I are going to do at a couple of different points over the rest of the summer is talk about what I've come to sort of tentatively call the super chill exercise system. Basically, she and I have both been exploring ways to exercise more, do better, get in better shape, keep track of how you're doing without all of the stuff that feels gamified and toxic and like it's always pushing you to do more and incentivizing you to go do crazy things when it might hurt you or you're sick, or like if I just have the Apple Watch yell at me for not closing my rings when I'm sick one more time, I'm going to lose my mind. You know what I mean? So to kick off our discussions about the super chill exercise system, real name pending, we'll see, I wanted to talk to the person who made Zombies Run. So V and I called up Adrian Hon, who is a writer and developer and storyteller and worked on Zombies Run from the very beginning until very recently. He spent more than a decade writing this game. And Zombies Run, if you've never played it, is, I don't know how to describe it exactly. It's an exercise fitness app that is also narrative. So when you're running, it's tracking you and it's aware of what you're doing, but it weaves a story in. Basically, it's a zombie apocalypse. You're in a place called Able Township, and you are a runner. That's your job, right? You go out into the barren wasteland of the post-apocalyptic world, and you do quests. You have to go find something, or you have to go rescue somebody, or you have to go to another place and learn about something. And it's all incentivizing you to run and be active and be out. But the idea is to make it fun with story, right? You're picking it up every morning to see what happens next, not to not break some streak. This app worked really well for me. Just having a thing that pushed me out, that gave me something fun to do while I was running. Sometimes it'll just be like, oh no, zombies, and you have to run faster. It was awesome. Like, I've always been a person who likes sports more than I like just running, because in sports, like, there's something to do. I have a purpose for why I'm moving fast. This felt like that. And it's kind of like immersive in the way that listening to podcasts is immersive. It sort of distracts you from running while also having you run. The story is great. You get to know the characters. There's just something terrific about this game that I haven't really seen replicated elsewhere. And Adrian was one of the people who built this thing from the very beginning. So V and I called up Adrian to get a sense of how a game like this comes together, why it's hard to do, and what it took to really pull it off. And we just started at the beginning. We asked him basically, over a decade ago, you're thinking about building a fitness game. This is like in the early days of the iPhone. Where do you even start?
I'm Adrian Hon. I ran Sixer Start and co-founded it for 17 years. And so we made Zombies Run. I left about 4 months ago. So that's probably the most well-known thing that I've done. Made Zombies Run, and also wrote a book critiquing gamification called You've Been Played. So that's fun. So, when we came up with the idea for Zombies Run, it was myself and novelist Naomi Alderman. And I had just kind of like really gotten into running at that time. And I had a Garmin Forerunner 201. So if you remember this is a massive, like chunky, it's not a watch. I mean, it's like a forearm bracelet. And it could track you by GPS. And I got this as a kind of way to make myself run more. And it actually did work, because it was cool to see like numbers and to see that I was getting better every day, every time I ran. And it had this thing called, I think it was like the virtual racer or virtual runner, which is like what it sounds like. It's like ghost racing in Mario Kart, where you're racing against yourself. So you can go out for a run, and it will show you yourself versus yesterday's self. And it was kind of really cool to see myself like in this very proto gamification thing, getting better each time. But then there was a moment where I stopped getting better and I started getting worse. And like my past self started beating myself. And I was like, this sucks. Like, this is not motivating anymore, because that only works on the way up. Like it doesn't work on the way down or when you plateau or if you're ill. And so then the iPhone came out, and then the App Store came out. And we had Runkeeper. There were even some smartphone running games, actually. There was one called Cache and Seek, made by a Korean developer, I think. And the idea is that you would run around your neighborhood and you see a map and there'd be like little treasure there. And it was actually like multiplayer, because other people could leave treasure for you. And I started playing that, and I was like, I actually just don't want to run to these places it's telling me to run to, because it's like not very safe, or it doesn't look nice. And so we started thinking about like, well, how could we make a good running game? Because people were trying to make these running games. I mean, one of the problems of a lot of them actually was you had to look at the screen when you're running, which I think for people who have not run before, that sounds cool. Like that sounds like a good idea. And if you've ever run, then you're like, this is not just terrible from a kind of safety point of view, but also if you stop every like 2 minutes to look at your phone and then start running again, like how are you really going to do that? Like that's not really practical. So the idea kind of came from, look, we have this amazing piece of technology, which is like a sort of like handheld computer, which is brand new, really. It's got internet connection, it's got GPS, it's got sound. People are used to using their headphones. What can we do with this to make a game? And so that's a lot of constraints, but it was also like really interesting from a game design point of view.
Well, and I think somewhere in there, you're also having to make a lot of decisions about like the mechanics of the game, right? Because you're talking about,
Yeah.
I think about all those early games, and there were or all those early running apps, and a lot of them were just like track your run, right? Like there's a
Yeah.
subset of people who just like want to know how far they run. But then, like you're saying, there were others that were starting to play with this, like how do we get you to run more? And this is when everybody was starting to experiment with all these new ways of gamification and leaderboards and all these different things. And I feel like from the very beginning, you kind of went the other direction of a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of, to the extent that they really thought about motivation, I think it was basically competition, right? So it was like, we have a leaderboard, and can you get to the top of the leaderboard? So like I was using the Fitbit at the time, and everyone was trying to get to the top of the leaderboard. And then the leaderboard would never move each week, because you'd have the people who like are in Europe and they walk everywhere, and you'd have the people in America at the bottom who drive everywhere and they don't climb. And so it's just like, this is not really motivating anyone, actually. Another aspect of that, kind of parallel to that, there'd be these territory capture games where you'd have like, you divide the world up into hexagons or squares, and it'd be like, can you go and capture enough space? And that's kind of like a leaderboard where it's just whoever runs the most, or has the most free time wins. And again, for some people, that's really motivating. I don't really think there was anything beyond that, not even kind of exploration. And so we wanted to do something completely different, which was storytelling, basically. It was like role play, which I don't think had been done before in that aspect. But it really came from the idea that people were already like listening to podcasts and audiobooks when they're running. So we weren't asking people to do anything new. And I think I still have this idea for a game. Someone feel free to steal it if you want, which was there's the bit in the Bourne Ultimatum when Jason Bourne is guiding this person through Waterloo Station. And he's like, okay, turn right now, turn left here. Okay, pause for 5 seconds. And Bourne goes and murders him. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of like that's a very like interesting, like dramatic thing, which is just entirely voice-based, basically. And it's like, oh, we could do something like that, where you have this audio story, which is telling you basically to run. And when you're running, crucially, you don't look at the screen, you don't tap on anything. So it's not really interactive game. You're just choosing or able to run faster or slower. And the story in the game kind of adapts to that. The zombies came into it because Naomi, my co-creator, she had just joined this running club, and they'd said, why do you want to run? And some people wanted to lose weight, and other people wanted to get fit. And one woman said she wanted to survive the zombie apocalypse. And I was like, oh yeah, that's funny. But then I was kind of like sick of zombies at that point. This was like 2011, 2012. And we had The Walking Dead, and we had, 28 Days Later. And I kind of thought zombies were over, which was wrong. They're still here. But from a storytelling point of view and from a gameplay point of view, especially for a running game, there's actually really nothing better that we found, because zombies, everyone knows how they work. You just have to kind of move faster than them. But also the great thing about zombies is that most zombies don't actually run. So, your classic zombies, your non-28 Days Later zombies, they just walk or they shamble. And so that was kind of a really clear thing for us, which was you don't actually have to run in Zombies Run. You can just walk if you want. And the game will not give you a hard time for that. Like, there is nothing gated in Zombies Run based on your distance or your pace. So if you even want to do it sitting on a couch, you can do that. Like, and some people do it like doing chores or whatever, and then most people do run or jog. And so the crucial thing there was we're not measuring your performance. Like, you can measure your performance. We give you stats and things like that. But actually, we're not rewarding that. In a way, what we're doing is we're saying, we're just going to make it more fun. Like, we don't want to make it like, we don't want to reward you for doing a run. We want you to be rewarded while running, which is a really important difference. And I think gets to like what makes for good gamification. Like, good gamification means where you're having fun while you're doing it, not after you've done it, which is really hard to do.
I actually, this is my running journey began with Zombies Run because I've been running for a long time, but I was not a natural runner in any form I was the person who is very much like my natural form is a couch potato. You would have to be chasing me basically for me to run. But it was a type of thing where I was like, oh, I have like a metabolic thing. I need to actually run. Running is one of the cheapest ways that you can exercise, but it is quite miserable when you're starting out.
Yeah.
So like, I think the thing that really resonates with me here in terms of like just talking about the chillness of things is like actually having fun while you exercise. Because I think with fitness tech and like with the gamification of it, I don't know why, but we just decide to invite so much anxiety into the process. Like leaderboard, oh, well, I feel terrible about myself because I'm not number one. And then if I am number one, I have this intense pressure to stay number one. And so then that's not fun anymore. I've turned the exercise into work. And then also, just as you said, like it really kind of resonated with the whole idea of the virtual runner and you're running against your past self who is better than you. I am at that stage because if you do it long enough, you are going to plateau. You are going to have a slump. You age. And, as you get older, you're not going to be quite as fast as you were when you're younger. So, I think with the game, you want people to keep playing. So how what were some of the things that you tried that you just realized was like, oh, this is actually making the game less fun, or, oh, this is making the game more fun?
Yeah, I mean, people come into it with different like motivations and different expectations. So we did this Kickstarter right at the beginning, and there were kind of two strands to it. One was there's going to be an amazing story by an amazing storyteller. And for a lot of people, possibly even most people, that's like the big motivation, which is I go out for a run. It's kind of told like in first person. So they're talking to you as if you're like, a real person. It's not like an audiobook. It has amazing characters. It's got like cliffhangers at the end of every mission. So you kind of want to know what happens next. And for us, that's a big thing where it was always, we want you to get up on a rainy Sunday morning and actually be excited to find out what's going to happen next, rather than be like, is there any excuse I can use not to go to run?
So I just want to push back on one piece of that I think is really interesting that you said, which is the idea that you can, like, you could just sit on your couch and play the game, and it would still be very fun, right? I think that there's probably some truth to that, but also if that were true, you would have just made a game that you can play sitting on your couch, right? So, and part of the reason I think this is a thing V and I keep talking about is like gamification when it's like Monopoly Go trying to get your money. I have pretty unconflicted, problematic feelings about, but this one is so different, right? Because the thing that you're doing creepy things to incentivize people to do is like ostensibly a good and healthy thing, and so you're in a position of saying like, okay, we built this cool game that people like because it's a game, but they also like it because it makes them exercise and because it makes them do a thing that is good for them, and it makes that thing more bearable. Like, does that change the balance of just like, if the goal was to just get more microtransactions from people, you would play it one way, but when it's like, okay, we actually want to have you do something that in moderation, even at greater intervals than you're currently doing it, is a good thing. Like, does that change the way you think about that balance?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, by trying to design it in the way we did, we left money on the table. Like, we could have had more engagement if we sent people notifications saying everyone in your base is going to die if you don't go for a run tomorrow, right? I mean, that's what like most games sort of done, or we would say like, if you go and do like a 3-mile run now, then you'll get double like, supplies, right? Duolingo style stuff. And that all this stuff is like really well documented, and it does work like in terms of increasing engagement and conversions. But I think that's the nice thing about owning your own company and having a small company, is that you can just say, we're not going to do that because we don't think that's going to be a good experience for people in the long term. So we would get people saying, oh, but like, can't people just cheat? And it's like, yeah, people can cheat about anything. Like, people can cheat in Dance Dance Revolution, right? You can cheat at Guitar Hero, you can cheat all these things. And it's like, if you're going to cheat at Dance Dance Revolution, don't play Dance Dance Revolution. Like, no one's making you do that. It doesn't really bother me as a designer, because it just shows that you kind of need to do it a little bit differently. And I think that, the other thing is I see it as a kind of accessibility mode mostly, rather than like people cheating. So, we don't know what situations people are in terms of their ability to move. We call it like simulate running when we do this. It might be that you can't use your legs, then you're going to do another exercise while you're doing this. And so we've had, people say, they'd like it that we offer these options. So having said that, like most people do actually run. So it's fine.
It's a really interesting thing to me because it really just hits home with the whole one size does not fit all, but especially with fitness, because we all have different capabilities, as you mentioned, with our bodies. We have different skill levels, different circumstances, but I find a lot of times I burn out when testing wearables and fitness tech because they are just kind of pushing you towards more. And it sometimes does feel like part of this is late stage capitalism because they need to make money off of this thing and they need to keep user bases. So they need to get us addicted to these platforms. Like, keep your streaks going. Sometimes it really does feel like streaks can be insidious just because, like, oh, I know you're getting me addicted to this, but actually what my body is saying is I need to rest. It's a tricky thing, right? Because if you want to stay injury free, you can't constantly do more. You do have to take days off, and that's good for you as well. So I think the big metric with gamification and fitness is streaks. And I was just curious, like, what your thought process was towards streaks and, like, do you have feelings towards it? I hate them personally.
I hate them. I don't like them. I mean, you will see people talk about how it motivates them to sort of go and if they're doing like NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, it's like nice to have a streak where you're writing for 30 days in a row, right? Or you've got like a calendar and you like mark it with an X every time you do something useful. And so I always kind of think it's about like, how can you get the incentives aligned correctly, right? And so I think that the issue with like fitness is that you see this with the Apple Watch. You see it with Peloton in particular. There are a lot of stories about Peloton where people were just completely burning out and like really injuring themselves. I just don't think this is like the way to like good health and fitness, actually. A lot of these companies, along with like trying to get you addicted, they try to sell this idea of you becoming a literal elite athlete, like as if like that is like a good thing to be. Like, if you want to be an elite athlete, that's fine. But like, it's not really a good idea, frankly, for most people. Like, most people have got jobs and they've got families, and it's very hard to like maintain that. It can actually be quite damaging. And I see that with a lot of the marketing. I mean, they've changed it a bit now, but like Nike and a lot of these other apps were like made by people who used to be athletes or who just like incredibly fit, right? And so they'd be like, wow, you've got to go and break through the pain barrier. You've got to go and do all this stuff. It's like, you don't actually need to do that. Like, you're just saying you have to do that. So I don't like streaks. It can be done in a way that's like less bad, right? But I think that when I look at the best games and the best apps out there, like Nintendo doesn't like, I mean, Nintendo does actually have streaks in Animal Crossing, but like it's very small. It's really small stuff, and it's not punishing at all if you don't match it. Like, there are streaks in some video games, but like you play Elden Ring or you play, like Legends of Zelda, that's not like a streak for playing it 2 days in a row. They don't need that because it's a really good game, right? And so I think it's just, it's an excuse for not making something that is as targeted or as interesting for people. It's very difficult because, if you're running a company, like I do have a lot of sympathy for people. Like we didn't take investment when we started. And so or we had very little investment. So they were like really patient and they were not giving us a hard time. People will call us like a lifestyle business, I guess. But it does mean that if you take investment, and you kind of have to take investment if you're a startup, because otherwise you'll just be outgunned by all the other startups who take investment, right? You don't really have a choice. They need to see the line go up. And one of the easiest ways of getting the line to go up is by adding in streaks, is by adding in notifications and making people feel bad about not using it. So, I can blame individual designers here, but it's like they're in an arms race.
It does feel like a much harder bar to set for yourself, though, because essentially what you're describing is that instead of punishing me for not doing the thing that you've already given me, you have to keep giving me new things, which is a lot of work for you. Like it's
Yes.
much easier to just yell at me for not closing my rings than it is to like you mentioned Elden Ring. Like people play Elden Ring because it's a great game. Like it's really hard to make a great game, and it's much easier to build a mechanic that requires me to open the app every day or my little character dies than it is to keep building a great game for 11 years.
Yeah, that's really true. It's definitely not easy. I mean, when you make a fitness game that's based around like narrative, you just need to keep on making more narrative, right? And so we turn from being a sort of tech company almost into like a content company. And if you open up like Zombies Run or ZRX now, it kind of looks a bit like Netflix. Like it has these carousels of rows and, you can like choose different stories, which shows how the company kind of evolved over time from like trying all these different like gameplay mechanics, some of which worked and some of which didn't, into like, okay, what we're doing is we're creating a process to try and make as many like consistently good stories as possible, like every week, multiple stories a week. And so we ended up with like writers' rooms and just sound designers, and like it's games as a service, as software as a service. And a lot of companies try and transition from making like a one-off game or one-off tech product into making constant content, and it's just really difficult to do, especially when you're making like specialized stories that are like about you running. Like that's a different kind of storytelling. And the team did it really well, but I think that's actually not something that tech companies are really set up to do.
It reminds me of Peloton, because they too have become a media company without, I think, necessarily intending that.
Yeah.
So, is this just then the challenge of gamifying fitness? Because I don't know, like I don't have an answer, but it's just like I constantly have to find new ways to motivate myself, or sometimes just like let myself have permission to be bad at fitness, which is opposite to what all these devices are doing, which is to optimize yourself to be the best version of yourself. So I feel like there's conflicting narratives here where like I think David and I just want to like be slightly healthier and not hate ourselves while doing it. But then, these watches, these rings, these games, not yours, but some of these games are just like, here's how to be the best version of yourself with metrics and numbers and get you addicted to it. So how do you
I mean, they're sort of creating goals for you that maybe you didn't have when you began, right? Which is like, the longest I've ever run is a half marathon. And everyone's like, oh, so why didn't you do like a marathon? I'm like, why would I do a marathon? I don't want to do a marathon. That seems like that seems like a bad time for me. I love it. I'm glad for you if you've done a marathon. I know someone who did like an ultra marathon. She's great, but like it's not for me. And so I think when you start, these applications, or games, it's always like, so what's your goal? And you've just got these like massive goals, right? Like, oh, do I really want to do that? Or do I just want to do something else? Just be a little bit healthier. So a big part of it is, again, I just come back to like, how can we make it fun? How can we make it a little bit more bearable? You mentioned that like when you start out running, it was the same for me. It's just horrible. It's so painful, like sweaty. It's just like, you get a stitch. I just can't like bear it. But then, the thing is, when you've done it a lot, you get good at running. And now I don't need like a game to go running. Like I just go out running to music or podcasts, and it's actually pretty easy for me, right? And so like, can we get people into that situation where they don't need us anymore? Of course, like from a business point of view, you want people to keep on playing and hopefully you're fun enough. But that's where you want to get people to, because it's the same with like a lot of stuff. When you get to a good enough point, it actually becomes way easier to maintain it. I do think it's going to be a challenge for a lot of gamified fitness apps, like because you just need to keep on providing the content. Like some of them, will just become basically gym instructor classes, like Peloton, or like a lot of VR stuff. Some of them will just be constant competition, like the cycling, things and Strava. And that's fine. If you like that sort of thing, you should do it. I do think there's still more room for companies, especially as AR like becomes more of a thing, to do like even more fun ways of making like sports and like competitive sports and cooperative sports. I really want to make like a cooperative fitness game. I think it'd be like so fun to do that. So yeah, like I think there's a lot we can do there. Like the kind of original gamified fitness is just playing like soccer. So like, you know, maybe we just do more of that, but I can make it a bit more convenient.
Are there any fitness apps or just like services out there that you see and you're like, oh, I kind of dig what they're doing then? Because we have seen so many of them just kind of take the same leaderboard and competition approach to it. So is there anyone out there that's doing it in a way that you're like, oh, that actually seems like that's a cool way for us anxious people out here. I have my list, but like us anxious people out here to actually take a step back and like build the foundational habits and get to the point where you're saying like you actually don't need it. Because I too am at the place where I'm like, oh, I'm a week without a run. I feel bad. I need to like actually go out and do it.
I actually just use like the Apple like fitness app and the health app a lot to go and track my stuff, you know, like particularly things like sleep and like heart rate recovery. So these are like more kind of technical like things. I don't like have like a third party app that I use to track that, but it is useful because I've noticed it does correlate actually with like when I've got more energy. And I use like the platform stuff because it just like integrates the best. So if I'm going for a run or for a swim, I just use whatever's on the Apple Watch, which is boring. But I kind of don't want to. I've sort of seen past the curtain, I guess, for a lot of the stuff, and I'm a bit worried about what people would try and do to my experience if I let them. You know, I'm quite vulnerable to gamification. I like extended streaks, you know, if you let me do it. But even though I know it's not good for me, and so I try and actually stay away from a lot of that stuff. So going for the more vanilla Apple Watch stuff is what I tend to stay on.
Do you think about things like sleep tracking, and we're getting to these smart rings and all this stuff, and we're getting to a point where there is this kind of like second by second 24-hour long ability to understand how you're doing? And I'm like, somebody is going to make the next version of Zombies Run that is not like an episodic thing that you put on headphones and listen to while you go exercise. It's going to be like a lifestyle game, and part of me wonders if that is super cool or totally dystopian. And the idea of like, I'm going to get a thing at, 2 a.m. that's just like zombies because it understood that I'm like in the right sleep zone for it. And like, this is coming. We have the data to do this now. And it feels like it's coming. And I can't decide if that's good or bad.
People keep on trying to do this. And we tried to do it with a game called The Walk, which was kind of like an all day, like, walking pedometer kind of thing. And I think in practice, it's quite hard to do because people we found don't really like to be interrupted with like gameplay and story. It's kind of annoying. And so the issue is that like third-party developers generally do not have enough contextual information about like what the person is doing to like make sure that the interruptions work. But of course you want to interrupt people, like if you're like a line goes up business person. So but then that usually gets too annoying. So we did try and make like 2 or 3 times to go and make these games, which would be kind of ambient. And I think at the point at which using AI or using just more sensors, devs have that ability, then you will see more of that stuff. And I think it will actually end up looking really interesting and looking more almost like role playing, right? It'll be like an even richer experience. And I know that people actually want to play these sorts of games where they're kind of more into it. At the same time, I think people probably be a little bit like nervous about what that means because that if it's really good, it just actually takes over your life, right? And so do people really want that just to get fit? I don't know.
As you look around this space right now, do you see any other things that feel kind of spiritually similar to Zombies Run? I think about like we've all at the Verge been using this app called Stompers, which is basically it's a sort of silly pedometer game, and I think it has hooked a lot of people in the same way that it's not even accurate, but being accurate is not the point. Like, do you see anything that feels like it's sort of doing the same thing a similar way?
I mean, like one of the other things, which I know V's written about, was the whole fantasy hike thing where, and like before that, it was just a direct rip off, Lord of the Rings, where you're like walking from the Shire to like Mordor. And I think actually at the start you would just type in like how far you'd walked into like a web page, and then it'd work it out, and it got slowly more interesting. And that's cool. Like that's a fun thing. People have done various things like that. There was a website or an app called The Beautiful Walk, which was kind of synced up to your fitness apps, and would do that. Like spiritually, like a lot of the VR stuff and AR stuff I think is interesting in the sense of, I come back to, I want people to be having fun when they exercise. And so I used to play like Hollow Point a lot, which was this old Steam like Vive game. And it was like an archery game. And basically you were just shooting at, enemies in virtual reality, arena with archery. And the cool thing was because the arrows kind of like move slowly, then you could dodge them. Like you can't dodge bullets in real life, right? But like in Super Hot with other games, you can dodge these. And so you're always just like rolling around the floor and jumping up and down. And like, it's just so energetic in a way that like you could never get me to do that in real life. Like if you told me, okay, go and fall over sideways and then go and scramble and roll back and jump up. It's like, no, I'm not doing that. But like you go and put me in VR and there's like arrows coming at me and I'm like shooting people with arrows. I'm like, this is the most fun I've ever had. But I don't have room for it, so I can't play that anymore. So that's kind of the problem. Like, what I think, and I do see like the Beat Saber and Fit XR and things like that. I'm like, it seems a bit boring to me. I want something a bit more involved than that. So.
First of all, how dare you? Beat Saber's amazing. That was outrageous. But no, I'm glad you actually mentioned Super Hot, because Super Hot is one of those games that I found to be like accidentally a surprisingly good workout. It's like time only moves when you do, so I'm doing a ton of like very deliberate, intense movement, and I'm sweating at the end, and it's like, oh right, this is what I'm going for. This is like a fun thing that made me sweat, not a thing that bullied me into exercising, which feels very different.
I think when we get the glasses, which we all want, and not the head, the VR headset, this is going to be the way people exercise. It's going to be amazing. Like it's so cool, but like it's just not there at the moment. Like it's just too, like. I don't know. It's like sweaty. Like I know people do use these things, but it's for most people, it doesn't seem to be a good experience. So I think that's going to be great. I think make believe and like role play and sports, like that's one of the best ways of getting fit.
I think giving myself permission to do the fantasy hike, to whack my editors with baseball bats and stompers, has really just kind of made it easier to be like, oh, it's okay if I'm not so fast. It's okay. You know what? Just give yourself the participation trophy. That's the only real badge that you need. It's okay. Maybe it's because I'm a millennial, but the participation trophy is good enough.
Well, the way we put it in Zombies Run is as long as you can move faster than a slow shamble, then, you're good with us. So keep on trying things until you find something that's fun. And if it's not fun, then it's not just that it's like, oh, well, boo-hoo. It's more like if you find something fun, you're going to keep up with it and it's going to work better, like in the long run. And it might be something really weird, which people don't talk about, or it might be kind of a more niche sport, but like you will find something that you like eventually, and then you should do that. And maybe there's an app for that as well.
All right, we got to take one more break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to take a question from the Vergecast Hotline. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. Let's do the Vergecast hotline. As always, the number is 866-VERGE11. The email is vergecast@theverge.com. Send us all your questions. We try to answer at least one on the show every week. This week, we have a question about handheld games.
Hey there, this is Keaton from Seattle, and I just listened to the handheld episode, and I'm about to have a baby, and so I've been thinking about what am I going to do for the endless hours sitting in a nursery with a child possibly on me. And I've been thinking about a handheld, but I've also kept myself from buying one because I think about the possibility of just using my iPhone with a backbone or my iPad with an Xbox controller. Is there an advantage to having a handheld over that situation if I've already got something like a Game Pass subscription? Thanks. Appreciate it. Bye.
I should say, by the way, before we get started, thank you to everybody who responded about our segment last week about gaming handhelds. I got a ton of good ideas from people. I got a lot of people who just like felt my pain about wanting to play FIFA. and not having a good device to do it on. People are mad at EA. I'm also mad at EA. Thank you to everybody who reached out. I have a lot of gadgets to try. I haven't bought anything yet, but I'm committed to answering this question for real at some point very soon, and I'll get back in touch. But thank you to everybody who reached out with suggestions and ideas and commiseration. I appreciate it. My answer for this question is actually pretty simple. I just went through this recently, and I just went through this recently. My kid is about a year and a half old at the beginning of 2023. I was in that like sitting up at night for 4 hours while a small child sleeps on my lap vibes. And you're like, what do I do with myself? I tried all the things. For a while, I was carrying a Switch around with me that I would use in those moments. I had a couple of like tester things. I got one of the slightly sketchy things from Amazon that you can buy that have a million retro games on them. I think the answer is just your phone. And I think this for a couple of reasons. One, and this is the key one, your phone is just there with you all the time. One of the things that happens when you're a new parent is that you just suddenly find yourself frozen to a place because your child just fell asleep. And you can plan ahead to some extent and say like, okay, I'm going to leave the Switch in the room with the chair where I'm probably going to be while the kid is sleeping or whatever. But your phone is just dramatically more likely to be in your pocket, right? And it also has a lot of retro games now, especially, which are really great to play, A, on silent, and B, for a couple of minutes at a time when you're in those moments where you're like, I don't know how long I'm going to have to do this. You can just quickly fire up Delta or one of the other emulators. And I played, I would say, maybe an alarming amount of like old Mario games, a few minutes at a time with one thumb on the joystick and one thumb on the buttons. Kind of wrapped my arms around the kid. It's a scene, but it works. The other thing is it's really malleable, which I like, right? So I have a backbone controller, which I like very much. And when I was able to sort of plan for it, I would use the backbone. I would bring the backbone with me. I would plug it in. I would have the full, better controller, and that worked great. Works really well with a lot of games on iOS and Android. Highly recommend a backbone as a sort of addition to all of this. But when you don't have that, you can just use your phone, right? And so having something that you're not stuck because you forgot one piece of it is really helpful. The other piece of it is that you will find yourself needing your phone for all kinds of other things, right? Maybe you're going to be one of those parents like I was who has a spreadsheet of like every time your kid eats and sleeps and goes to the bathroom, and having that with you at the same time that you have your like thing you want to play games on, super helpful. If you are the type of parent who is going to be like texting your partner or taking lots of pictures or whatever, again, your phone just becomes like the center of your baby universe in a very real way. And so not adding another device to the equation is sort of useful. There are good reasons to get a dedicated device. Like I've talked to a lot of people who bought a Switch, put like Zelda on it, and then left it in the baby's room. And that becomes the like, I am in the baby's room. This is the thing I'm going to play. There's something to that. But I think for me, having fewer batteries to worry about, having the thing that's probably in my pocket be the thing that works, and having kind of the one device to rule them all wound up being really helpful. Also, there are a lot of games that I played that I would call like deeply boring, repetitive games that are actually perfect for mobile. Because you're in this headspace when you have a newborn where you're just exhausted and you're like, okay, I want to play a game. I don't want to use my brain at all. And I'm going to need to play this game for somewhere between 1 minute and 5 hours. Games like Hole Down, which is basically it's like reverse snood. You shoot a ball downward and you try to remove all the stuff down at the bottom. And the further you go down, the more points you get. Endlessly repeatable games. I probably played 100 hours of that game, and it's a perfect little mobile game. You can play it with one hand, which is another victory given baby sleep situations. Having something you can do with one hand is pretty helpful. I did a lot of like crosswordy kinds of things when I was like, okay, I actually need to use my brain a little bit. I did a lot of those like temple run kind of endless runner games because again, super easy, super repetitive, doesn't require any brain power. Those are the kinds of games that I ended up playing way more than I expected. I was like, oh, I'm going to play a lot of like fun old PS2 games because now I have all this time to kill. And I ended up playing like infinite hours of Hole Down. because it's just what happens in those moments. You're tired. You have one hand to spare while there's a human sleeping on top of you, and that just is what it is. So I think the answer is probably either a Switch for the games or your phone with a backbone or some other kind of controller. But I would start with your phone because there's a lot of games. It's super easy. It's super accessible. And odds are it's going to be right there with you, which is pretty important. I hope that helps. Let me know. And again, I've gotten tons of really good handheld recommendations over the last couple of weeks. And if you have good ones for me or for Keaton here, please let me know. All right, that's it for the Vergecast today. Thank you to everyone who was on the show. And thank you, as always, for listening. There's lots more on everything we talked about, from the Microsoft CrowdStrike chaos to V's great reporting on wearables and rest days in the Apple Watch, to lots of stuff on gaming handhelds on theverge.com. I'll put some links in the show notes, but also read theverge.com. There is a shocking amount going on right now for it being like late July. So keep an eye on the website. And as always, if you have thoughts, questions, feelings, or gaming handhelds you think I should buy, email us at vergecast@theverge.com or call the hotline, 866-VERGE11. Keep sending us questions. We've got lots more stuff to talk about this summer. Please keep all of your questions coming. And like I mentioned last week, I want more like teeny tiny weird tech mysteries. So if you have a teeny tiny weird tech mystery, send it to us. Can't wait to hear it. This show is produced by Andrew Marino, Liam James, and Will Poor, and this episode was edited by Xander Adams. The Vergecast is a Verge production and part of the Vox Media Podcast Network. Nilay, Alex, and I will be back on Friday to talk about more of the Microsoft CrowdStrike mess, some AI news, some new gadgets, and Lord only knows what else between now and then. We'll see you then. Rock and roll.